is up, everybody? My name is Dane Thompson, and welcome back to another episode of BrunDown. So this is the 3 steps to an LS swap. So what I mean by 3 steps, basically like 3 portions, if you will. You got to break it down into sections. That way it's not overwhelming, and you get it done. It doesn't live on jack stands, or you sell the project before you even finish it. Because 9 times out of 10, we bite up way more than we can chew. So let's take those big bites, break them down to little bite-sized pieces, and get that project knocked out. So, step 1. This is critical. You need to pick your motor and your transmission combination. So, do you need the overdrive? Do you not care? Are you racing? You want a power glide? Do you have a transmission in the car? Do you got a 400, 350, something that's in the classic or whatever car it is you're swapping that would mate up to a LS motor, maybe save you some money? You already have a fancy converter, who knows? The other thing too, you gotta pick if you want, the truck motor, something aluminum, LS3, maybe you got a budget, you're going LSX, whatever it is you were doing, you need to pick those 2 items because essentially that's what's gonna run and power the vehicle and shift it and motor you on down the road. So, step 1 is to pick those and get it in the vehicle. And I know that sounds like a lot and I'm just saying it, but in all reality, for most guys, it's the easiest part to do because a lot of you guys wrench on your own stuff. If you're watching this video, you're thinking about LS swapping a car, that means you know how to take a motor out and put one in and all those fun things, right? So after you have it in place, you got your cooling, you got your exhaust. I'm not getting into power adders, so I'm assuming you're gonna use the log manifolds that the swap, maybe you bought a swap that comes with that. You can just plumb that into your existing. Maybe you want some fancy headers, who knows? But you get that thing in place, you get the cooling hooked up. Essentially, like the thing lives there, it's sitting there and it's ready to rock and roll, but it doesn't run because there's still things you need. That brings us to step 2. What do you need for an engine to run? You need fuel and spark. So the second thing you're gonna need is fuel. Pretty much every single old car I've ever owned, American muscle, I guess if you will, has a carburetor. It runs on little to no fuel pressure, really. It just has to fill the bowls up, and then the carburetor kind of does the rest, right? All that voodoo that carburetors do that I know nothing about. But now you're going to fuel injection. Well, injectors are basically these little guys here. I got some behind me, and all they do is open and close. If they don't have significant fuel pressure, it's not squirting the fuel in. There's nothing there. So you have to have a high pressure and volume of fuel in order for your injectors to work and be efficient. Typically, if you were just doing an NA setup and you wanted to run the injectors that your swap came with, let's say a truck motor, for instance, they're a 27-pound injector, they'll work just fine on like a 255 liter per hour pump. Anything pretty much you can stuff in the tank will power those injectors. They're not overly large. You don't have power adders, nothing crazy. We just want to motor down the road and do a few burnouts. Those will get you by, those will get you down the road, and you don't need a fancy pump to do it. Say you're planning on going E85, maybe power adder later, you can put a little bit bigger injector, and then you can put a little bit bigger pump to facilitate that. We won't get into it, but regardless, you're gonna need a high pressure pump, which you can either retrofit into the tank that you have. I know Holley makes some slick kits. I've never used one, but I've seen them. They basically retrofit into the existing tank, which is killer for an application like an old car. I have a 64 Chevelle. You could buy a repop tank for cheap, buy the retrofit kit, and now you will rock and roll. You have your pump in tank, filters, all that stuff, and it sits in the stock location. How sweet is that, right? The other thing you're gonna need is typically a return line. It depends on how you plumb it. You can plumb it without a return line, which would mean you'd run like the stock Corvette filter where it filters and returns, and then there's just the one line that goes up to the front. What I typically like to do, and I feel is a much better setup, you can agree or disagree, leave in the comment section. I like a return style setup, granted because I race it and I have a lot more volume of fuel, but I feel like the fuel is at the rails when the injectors need it that way, other than it pumping it up to it. So what you can do in that instance to make it a little bit easier is you can use the existing fuel line that's already in the car. Typically, like in my Chevelle, for instance, I'll just use that as an example. It was a dash 5, which is like a 5/16 line. Don't quote me on that. I'll put it on the video. But you can use that as your return, and then you can run a new feed line, which you'd want at least in like a 3/8, which is a typical size fuel line for like a GM V8. So that'd be a dash 6. So if you run the one new line, you can run that as the feed, and then when it regulates it and sends it back, you can just use the existing fuel line and plumb all that back in at your either new fuel cell or your retrofit tank, or however you're gonna do that. But this isn't a video of how to do it. This is how to break it down into bite-sized pieces. So let's recap. Step one, you picked your engine and transmission combination. You got everything set up in the car. It looks like a motor. It has the radiator, it has the cooling fans on there. It's all plumbed up. Everything looks happy, it just doesn't run. And then now you have your new fuel tank and your fancy lines and your high pressure pump. Everything's ready to rock and roll. Well, you're missing spark, you're missing engine management. So that brings me to step number 3. Step number 3 is you choosing the engine management for your combination. So in step 1, you picked which LS engine you wanted. You went to the junkyard and you pulled a 5.3 or a 4.8 because you don't know which one it is, but you got one. You stuffed it in the hole. Everything is there, it's ready to be wired up. Well, your options depend on which transmission you picked. So if you needed that overdrive because you want to cruise 100 miles an hour down the freeway and you want to try to get that 20 mile an hour gallon, 20 gallons per mile mark, or whatever it is you're trying to do with your overdrive and your fanciness, you need something to control that. If you ran the older transmission because you saved a buck, because the older GM transmissions like Power Glides and TH350s and 400s, they'll bolt right up. 700R, I guess, if you wanted to be the middle ground with the overdrive and then the old school. All those transmissions will bolt to the LS, so you saved yourself a little expense there. And then now when it comes time to control it, you don't have to control the transmission, so you saved a little bit more money there. Well, your options are, there's other ways to do it, but these are my favorite. So I'm an advocate of the Holley products. So the Holley Terminator X or the X Max, if you have an overdrive transmission, will do you great. I've got a video on which one you need and why. And if you want to try to keep budget down, and maybe you're pretty good at wiring, you can get a stock computer and a harness and you can weed that thing out, and that'll control a transmission as well as not, depending. But then you're going to need some HP tuners and some other things I don't want to get into. But those are your options either way. You'll need a stock computer with a harness, and then you got to either strip it down or buy one from PSI or somebody that makes a harness. Maybe you got a buddy that's a wiring guru, or you can get a standalone unit like a Holley. So those are pretty much all the ingredients. You throw all those in a big pot, you mix it together, and that's what you get is an LS swap that's NA. You can cruise down the road, you can get some reliability, plenty of power, lots of fun, lots of smiles per gallon. I can tell you that much. I've got 2 LS swap vehicles. One is a 64 Chevelle and the other is a 72 twin turbo Winnebago here on the channel. So questions, comments, concerns, leave them in the comments section. We can discuss it. If you guys need me to go in depth on some of these things, maybe I can kind of go over them for you. I've done multiple vehicles. I have buddies that have swaps. I've been doing it for a little while now, so I'm pretty comfortable when it comes to LS swapping vehicles. So that is it. Until next video, I'm out.